Hi, and welcome to Surprised by Joy. We're glad that you are with us as we take this 30-day journey, 30-day adventure into looking for joy in surprising places in the book of Philippians. As we know, Paul wrote this letter while he was in jail and offers the church in Philippi some beautiful words to encourage them towards living a life of joy in their relationship with Christ. So Danielle and I are on this journey unpacking this text, and we're glad that you're here with us. I'm glad for all the words that you've sent to us and some of the stories that you share with us. We're really grateful for that. Please feel free to continue doing that. And we're also sitting close because we've been in quarantine together this whole time as we do worship and lead worship for you guys. So we are keeping every precaution and safety in place outside of when we record, and that is how we're living into the quarantine. So we come to the end of chapter 3 today. Thanks be to God. This has been a crazy section. But let's read that together. If you have your Bible, feel free to pull out Philippians chapter 3. We're going to be looking at verses 17 through 21 and see how the end of this text comes at us. Go for it.
Should I just read it all?
I would love that.
Okay. Stick with me, friends. Keep track of those you see running this same course, headed for the same goal. There are many out there taking other paths, choosing other goals, and trying to get you to go along with them. I've warned you of them many times. Sadly, I'm having to do it again. All they want is Easy Street. They hate Christ's cross. But Easy Street is a dead-end street. Those who live there make their bellies their gods. Belches are their praise. All they can think of is their appetites. But there's far more to life for us. We're citizens of high heaven. We're waiting the arrival of the Savior, the Master, Jesus Christ, who will transform our earthly bodies into glorious bodies like his own. He'll make us beautiful and whole with the same powerful skill by which he is putting everything as it should be, under and around him. Belches are their praise.
I know. It's great.
That does reframe how I think about burping around my home. Not my own, but others in my family.
If your daughter's burping, you'd be like, are you praising God with that burp?
Yeah, right,
That
right.
would be funny. So as we come to the end of this passage, so I would say Paul's really bookended this passage of chapter 3. And he's started with calling out the Judaizers by saying that their way of choosing to follow the law, believing that somehow that law is going to set you free, is a fallacy, and he's calling the Philippians to not do that.
Yeah.
And then he ends it by calling out a whole nother group in history that are kind of the libertarians or the antinomians who believe that salvation by faith and being given this grace, that they're no longer bound to any moral law. Right? So they just have...
Because they have a magic ticket.
They have magic tickets, so everything's fine. Whatever they want to do is fine. They can live however they want to live. They got Jesus. Jesus has punched their card, and they're good.
Man, I sort of wish that was true.
Yeah, me too. If I had to pick one of the two, I would be more of an antinomian, and probably am more of an antinomian in many ways. So the distinction between the antinomian and other Christian views on moral law is that antinomians believe that obedience to the law is motivated by an internal principle flowing from belief rather than an external compulsion, right? So all I have to say that it's for them, any sort of following a moral code is questionable.
Okay.
That everybody has their own freedom and all of that. And I think Paul has heard, in light of reading this, I think Paul's heard that the church in Philippi is being split in different ways. It's being split by those who are being circumcised and following all the rules, and it's being split by those who say, no, you should have never been circumcised in the first place, and they have a divided mind.
Yep.
And so he's closing out this part of the letter before he moves into his conclusion by saying, in the same way that when I was with you and called you to the goal of living in complete reckless abandon to the way of Jesus, I still am, and that's neither the strict following of the law nor the abandonment of any moral code.
Yeah.
That there is a middle way, which is part of the historical teaching of Christianity, right? That what Jesus offered when he taught and taught the way of Jesus was a historic third way of being in the world. That the world may say this. In fact, Jesus says frequently, "You've heard it said that, blah, 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 but I tell you this."
Yes.
And I think Paul's doing that for them and those who are following the way in light of Paul. So I think what Paul shows us is that our life purposes are reoriented and changed as we come into relationship with Christ. And where most of us have, a life goal of, well, I just want to live a good life, Paul says there's more to it than that. Like, that's kind of the antinomian way. There's more than just living a good life, eat, drink, be merry. There's more to life than that.
Yeah.
And for him, that's what he wants for them, that the easy street is a dead-end street.
Yeah.
And
there's a cost.
There's a cost.
There's a cost to following Christ.
And he'll say in other letters that sometimes the cost is what it does to those around you. Right? It may not be a cost to me. Like, I can live with complete freedom and find God in that space, but somebody I'm in a relationship may be destructed by how I'm living.
Right. So if I might be able to handle one thing, a lot of one thing, but if that hurts your faith, I should think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that there's a communal life and there's an individual life, and communal life calls us to live differently.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So if the goal is transformation by the way of the cross, right? That's part of what he talks about, like that go all into the way, even to death itself.
Yeah.
With them. If our goal is this reckless abandonment of the love of God, what does that way mean to you, Danielle? Like, personally, like, how do you find yourself as we close out chapter 3 being challenged to live into this way differently?
I think it is to find that third way for myself, because I can find myself sometimes the pendulum swings from one place to another, sort of like, well, I'm fine. I'm doing things fine. It's going fine. Or I should blow it all up and find it totally, go live somewhere like Mother Teresa did and do something that has so much more meaning or something like that, I'll say. But I do think the way is finding the harder way. And I think I'm at a stage in my life too where I've made a lot of decisions that it's time for me to stick with, like my husband and I chose each other. We chose to have 2 kids. We chose to live in Minneapolis. We chose, so not trying to rethink some of those things that already have had a lot of thought put into them, but to instead now say, okay, now in this time, in this space, with our family looking like this, how then do we live most faithfully? And I'll just be honest and say, I think middle life is not that exciting in that way, And that's where I think a lot of our culture gets hung up, because I do think the fun of all those choices for so many seasons of our lives is now overshadowed by needing to sort of stay
the course and the routine.
The course and stay on the way, but to do that well. So the question is, how do I do that well? I don't know.
Yeah.
Day by day.
Day by day.
Yeah.
I think so.
How about for you?
I think for me, it's about a more intentional listening in the moment, right? Like, I get wrapped up I'm a big picture guy, right? So sometimes I get wrapped up in the big picture, and it causes me not to be able to listen in the moment.
Because you're thinking about what could be out there, what might be out there, how to get ready for that.
Yeah. Like in this moment where everything's been put on hold. It's a disorienting moment. And so I'm faced with kind of the day-to-day question we asked yesterday of, what does it mean to love next? What's the next right thing versus what's the next 7 right things? And
then I'll get
to get
there.
to the 12th thing.
Yeah.
And this, part of it is Paul ends this and he's calling them out to not be like the antinomians and to not be like the Judaizers, but to do this third way. It has me asking a similar question that you just asked is, what is the third way for me? What is the third way for Wayzata Community Church? What is the third way for Christians in this time and space?
Yeah.
And I think it's an important question, one that I haven't spent enough time really thinking about, of delving into. And part of what makes this beautiful is the trust that Paul really has. Like, he ends this by saying, there's far more to this life for us, right? That like what he trusts as the core of his being is that this way that might lead to death is actually more of a life,
Right.
than either of these other 2 ways.
Than any other life you could craft for yourself.
Absolutely. And that being a citizen in the kingdom of God is worth more than anything else. And he says that part of what's happening in this process, not just in the future and our bodies that are to come, because he has this whole like resurrection framing of, what happens if Christ returns kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he's saying that God's going to do what God's always done. He's going to make us beautiful and whole with the same powerful skill that he's putting everything into its right position,
Yes.
both below and beside God.
Yeah.
And so part of choosing to live this way of life is realizing that we're going to, part of this next right step modality of life is that it does lead us to greater wholeness than me trying to project what the wholeness looks like and working towards it.
Well, and it says that God is the one that will make us beautiful and whole. It's not me. I'm not the one that makes myself beautiful and whole. It's me. It's the act, I think, my part in it is putting myself in God's hands or putting myself in the way of Christ, which is, I think, really freeing. I mean, I think it's really freeing to say, God does this good work. I don't have to do the good work. Beyond keeping myself in that way, which is work.
Well, and I think, and to be careful, right, in this moment of us not hearing that as reckless abandonment into God's love means that, whatever's next is next.
Right.
Oh
my gosh.
For Paul, this has been work, right? He's, this continue to work out your salvation piece that we did in chapter 2. For him, there is this task of daily putting ourselves in that place. That's our role and where we come in, knowing that we can trust that as we do those things, Christ holds the big picture, that God holds the big picture.
Yeah.
And that God is going to do what God has done from the beginning of history, which is to sow goodness all around us and to create goodness in every pocket of God's space so that we too are becoming whole and good in the process of living out our own faith.
Yeah.
So it's really hopeful and really challenging.
Yes.
And I think that's part of where we find joy. I think sometimes I want joy to be handed to me in a silver platter simply.
Yes.
And it doesn't usually come that way for me.
It does not. And I was watching a vlog by a woman named Kate Bowler, who's written a book about her own journey with cancer as a really young woman and also her study of theology. And she talks a lot about how following God does not make everything in our lives work out. The silver platter does not show up because we follow God. And it matters to follow God. And so that is the complexity of this life we've been called to, this journey that we're on, is that it is not promised that it will be easier. It is not promised that all will go well. What is promised is that there will be meaning that is much deeper than anything we could ever craft on our own.
Yeah.
And I think at our best, that's what matters most. I mean, we all believe that matters most.
I do too. And I think this is why I don't like collapsing joy and happiness on each other. Mm-hmm. Right? Because somehow happiness is that smiley, warm, and cancer's not happy.
No.
And even the things I learned from cancer aren't happy.
Yeah.
They can be beautiful.
Yeah.
They can be transfiguring. Mm-hmm. They can be transformative. And I can have joy in them. But that may not be happiness.
Right.
It may not have anything to do with happiness. So I think for me, part of as we come to this end is recognizing that joy is a much deeper word that Paul is associating with, because Paul's life wasn't freaking happy all the time.
No.
He lived a hard life. He'd been shipwrecked and beaten and imprisoned and because of him, there is a thing called church.
Yeah. Right.
Right, which is pretty damn impressive.
Yes. Still as messy as it's ever been. As messy as it's ever been. But still worth gathering for.
And I don't think Paul would be surprised by that. I think if Paul walked in today, he'd be like, oh yeah, totally. The church is still messed up.
Really?
I do. I think
he'd be like, people, read the letter. No.
I think he would too. No, I think he would be too. I think
Yeah.
he would say like, man, your life would be better if you just do the things I said, because I think that's who Paul is. But I also think that he'd be like, yeah, this is what happened. Like what I learned over the course of my life was that as communities live and grow and shape and move, it's messy.
Yeah.
And they get in fights and they get in struggles and they doubt and they drive back deeper into their faith, and then they walk away from their faith and they come back to their faith, and that is part of the journey. Keep pressing forward.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, it doesn't seem like God is that worried about us. And what I mean by that is God, I just think that God abides with us. God is faithful to us. God sticks with us in it all and doesn't seem to get super worried about us. In a really beautiful, in that kind of way where, the kind of parent that can let their toddler fall off the couch because they're sort of like, it's only 2 feet and I know what's going to happen to you. You might cry, but you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
That kind of freedom giving.
Well, it's a trust. It's a freedom giving trust.
And knowing the end of the story, knowing that these trials, this suffering, the things that we endure make us stronger when they're done with Christ in mind. Or for the sake of Christ, for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of something bigger than ourselves. Yeah, for the sake of wholeness, transformation.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Well, let's jump into the adventure questions.
All right.
What are you focused on these days? What's your focus before the pandemic, right? And now how is your experience during these days of some considered collective suffering? How has that changed your focus? How has the quarantine changed your focus? And then second, how can you live the way of Jesus or the way of love this week in a different way?
And I think you should start with your start and stops.
Do you? Do you think I have one?
I'm hoping you do so that I can think of mine.
Oh, nice. For me, I think I'm going to stop choosing not to trust myself and trust myself in the way that God trusts me. I think part of what I struggle with in this moment is the next wrong step, right? Instead of the next right step, I keep focusing on what if I take the wrong step, and I'm circling around that.
Yeah.
Because I don't trust myself in this new day.
Yeah.
And what I want to embrace is that if I'm listening and if I'm paying attention, I have the wisdom and knowledge to take the next right step.
Yes. I believe that. I think that's so good.
Maybe I will too later.
I think that I'm going to this week believe that God really is putting everything together as it should be. To not believe that there are mistakes happening around me or in me. To not believe that the best is behind us or behind me, but to believe that God is putting everything as it should be, making it beautiful and whole.
I love that.
I'm going to look for that this week.
I love the words beautiful and whole.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So as you go from this place, may you go finding what is beautiful and whole for your life in these days and for your family in these days. Go in peace.
Amen.